Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well. So in this video, I have a brand new what if storyline for you. What if the events of Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man 3 played out differently? Remember that famous line that's essentially a meme now where Bully Maguire says,
"I'm gonna put some dirt in your eye."
Well, what if he actually, quite literally, did just that to Eddie Brock?
I never thought he'd really do that. See? Right there.
Peter would still confront Eddie about his fraudulent Spider-Man photos at the Daily Bugle. After Peter says, "You're trash, Brock," he throws a handful of dirt in Eddie's face as Eddie screams and the office looks in shock. Eddie's scream gets Mr. Jameson's attention as he marches out of his office to see Eddie kneeling on the floor, dirt on his face with Peter standing over him. Because the situation looks worse than Peter briefly shoving Eddie like in the movie, JJ instantly fires Peter. Robbie Robertson feels bad for Eddie as he's on the floor. Even though he did lie about a photo, Robbie convinces JJ to let Eddie keep his job. Because of this little change of events in this reality, Eddie wouldn't be driven to make his way to the church that leads to him becoming Venom. This would drastically change the third act of Spider-Man 3, as Venom wouldn't team up with Flint Marko to kill Spider-Man, MJ wouldn't be kidnapped by Eddie, and Peter would never plead with Harry to help him save MJ, which prompted Harry to change his ways. But because Peter has now been fired, this would lead him down a darker, angrier path. He would essentially be Batmaning it on an extreme level, finding criminals at night and beating them to a pulp. Even though in the actual movie, Symbiote Peter does some pretty messed up stuff, we never really see him fight random thugs or stop random crimes in the symbiote suit. So here I would want to see what a rageful and unrelenting black-suited Spider-Man would look like. The Venom symbiote would begin to have a much stronger hold on Peter. The angrier he got, the more he would lose himself. Spider-Man would become infamous, as the Daily Bugle has a field day detailing the violence and fear that Spider-Man has brought to the streets of New York City. This news would reach Flint Marko, who's been in hiding ever since Spider-Man confronted him about Ben Parker. Killing that man was the mistake that's haunted Flint for years, and now he felt responsible for this rogue Spider-Man. He knew he had to find Spider-Man and explain himself. It would be reported on the news that a seemingly random sandstorm tornado-like event was happening at the same construction site from the actual movie. So Peter is made aware that the Sandman is still alive, and would make his way to the site to kill him for good. This way, the finale wouldn't be kicked off by, "Oh, Mary Jane is kidnapped again." Instead, it would focus on what this entire movie is about: revenge and forgiveness. So we have Flint wanting to explain himself to Peter, the same way Peter had been trying to explain himself to Harry before he gave up. When Peter confronts Flint, he doesn't waste any time attacking his uncle's true murderer. Flint quickly retreats and uses all the sand around him to protect himself. However, Peter would have become stronger and faster since their first encounter, as the Venom symbiote was beginning to take over. This would be a very unique final battle to a Spider-Man movie, because now Spider-Man is essentially the aggressive villain that can't be reasoned with. As the fight continued, Flint would return to his normal state for a brief moment to reason with Peter again, but Peter would web zip to Flint and kick him as he stumbled back. We then see a spherical object thrown into Flint's chest as he looks at Spider-Man confused as it begins to make a beeping sound. Peter looks at the object and realizes what it is: a pumpkin bomb. Flint's sand-filled body explodes as sand bursts everywhere. Harry Osborn then flies in, but this time he isn't here to save Peter, and there is no MJ who's kidnapped. Harry would fly around Peter as he hits him with his board, making the symbiote-bonded Spider-Man angry. A monstrous shriek was heard, and it was coming from Peter. Venom was beginning to take over, and Harry could see Peter struggling to take control. Harry gives a look of hesitation before flying in again. Peter manages to gain control, webbing Harry's glider as he falls to the floor. Now they were face to face with each other, both angry and vengeful. I would want this fight to be much more personal and grounded, like a slugfest between two people seeing red, trying to do as much damage to the other, almost mirroring the final fight between Peter and Norman in Spider-Man 1. Peter would begin to lose control of the symbiote as he traded punches with Harry, but the more Venom took over, the more Harry seemed to hurt. Harry is then slashed in the chest by Venom's claws as he shrieks, and in that moment we see it's taken over, and Peter let it take over as he begins to beat down on Harry. We then see MJ call to Peter, begging him to stop. Peter nearly snaps out of it, asking MJ what she's doing there, as she looks over to Flint, who's beginning to reconstruct himself. Peter looks at MJ, and for one brief moment, we could see the Peter Parker who is Spider-Man, not this monster he was becoming. This moment would be a chance for MJ to finally try and save Peter. He looks back at Harry, his best friend who is being beaten to death. But Venom would resume the beating. Harry would slowly reach for a blade he kept hidden on him, waiting for the right moment to end it. Then he says, "Peter, this is the blade that the goblin killed your father with," Peter says as he struggles to not drown in the symbiote again. Harry looks at Peter confused, waiting for him to explain. Your father didn't kill himself trying to kill me. It was something else. This monster inside of him. It took over. The same thing happened to Dr. Octavius. And now it's happening to us. Harry, I'm sorry. Peter then begins to rip Venom off with all his might, but he wasn't strong enough. He needed to weaken it. He sees Harry's glider and grabs 2 pumpkin bombs. Peter tells Harry to get MJ out of there. Harry sees what he's doing and asks if there's a better way. But when he sees Peter struggling with the symbiote, he realizes there's no time. He flies MJ to safety. Peter takes a pumpkin bomb to his chest and it explodes. Venom did its best to protect its host, but now they were both weak, with Peter bloody and bruised, as the symbiote, half attached to Peter, shrieks in agony. Peter rips off Venom and throws it in front of him, as we see a familiar image of Venom's true form that we saw at the end of Spider-Man 3. Holding one last pumpkin bomb, Peter looks at the monster he would have become. I'm sorry, Uncle Ben, but with great power comes great responsibility. Peter runs towards Venom with the pumpkin bomb in hand as it goes off. The dust settles to reveal a dome of sand, dispersing as Peter is revealed to be alive. He looks around in shock as Flint Marko appears. Peter asks, why? What was it you said before? With great power comes great responsibility. My Uncle Ben taught me that just before he died. Peter, all I've wanted to say is, I'm sorry. That wasn't me. I know. Peter gives Flint a look of true understanding and says, I forgive you. Flint then disappears into the wind just as he does in the actual movie. Peter then goes off to find Harry and MJ, but this time Harry isn't fatally wounded. When the trio are reunited, they hug as they all apologize to each other. I think this would have been a much happier version of the ending where the trio that these movies have been following have made peace with themselves and their friends and essentially gets to ride off into the sunset at the end of the trilogy. All this because Bully Maguire decided to actually go through with putting dirt in Eddie's eye. That's pretty much the end of this story. If you have any suggestion of storylines or specific movies, please let me know. These are super fun to create and I can't wait to make more. Have a great day, everyone. I'll see you next time.